The morning sun cast long shadows across the gardens of Clarence House as Queen Camilla hurried through the corridors, her mind racing with preparations for the day ahead. King Charles had an important meeting with foreign dignitaries, and everything needed to be perfect. She clutched a small silver tray containing his morning medication, the same routine they had followed for months since his health concerns began. Camilla had always prided herself on being meticulous about Charles's care. The doctors had been very specific about his medication schedule, especially after his recent treatments. Each pill was carefully organized in a weekly dispenser, marked with days and times to ensure nothing was missed. But this morning felt different somehow, rushed and chaotic. As she walked past the grand staircase, her phone buzzed with an urgent message from her private secretary. The schedule had changed again, and Charles needed to leave 30 minutes earlier than planned. Panic flickered in her chest as she realized they were running behind. She quickened her pace, the delicate china on the tray clinking softly with each step. The royal household was already buzzing with activity. Staff members moved efficiently through the halls, preparing for the busy day ahead. Charles's security detail was conducting their final briefings, and his personal aide was reviewing documents one last time. Everyone seemed focused and professional, but Camilla couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She paused outside Charles's study, taking a deep breath to compose herself. Through the heavy oak door, she could hear his voice discussing security arrangements with his protection officers. The conversation sounded serious, more intense than usual. She knocked gently and waited for his familiar voice to invite her in. Charles looked up from his desk as she entered, his face showing the strain of recent weeks. The pressure of royal duties combined with his health challenges had taken a visible toll. He smiled warmly at her approach, but she noticed the fatigue in his eyes. The morning light streaming through the tall windows highlighted the worry lines that had deepened over the past few months. "Your medication, darling," she said softly, setting the tray on his desk beside a stack of official papers. The pills looked so small and innocent, yet she knew how crucial they were to his well-being. Each one served a specific purpose in maintaining his health and energy levels. Charles nodded absently, his attention divided between her and the security briefing continuing in the background. One of his protection officers was explaining new protocols for the day's events, something about increased security measures due to recent intelligence reports. The atmosphere in the room felt tense, charged with an undercurrent of concern that made Camilla's stomach tighten. She watched as Charles reached for the small glass of water she had brought, then hesitated. Something in his expression made her look more closely at the medication tray. For a moment, doubt crept into her mind. Had she counted correctly? Were these the right pills for morning? The routine that had become second nature suddenly felt uncertain. The security officer's voice grew more urgent as he described potential threats that had been identified. Charles's attention was completely absorbed by the briefing, his hand hovering over the medication without really seeing it. Camilla felt a chill of premonition, as if the universe was trying to warn her about something she couldn't quite grasp. In the background, she noticed one of the royal guards standing silently by the door. Sergeant Matthews had been with the family for years, a quiet professional who seemed to notice everything while remaining invisible. His eyes met hers briefly, and she saw something there that made her pulse quicken. Was it concern? Recognition? She couldn't be sure, but his steady gaze seemed to be trying to communicate something important. The morning that had started with such promise now felt heavy with unspoken tension. Charles continued listening to his security team while Camilla stood frozen beside his desk, torn between her desire to help and a growing sense that something was terribly wrong. The medication sat waiting, innocent yet somehow ominous, while the clock on the wall ticked away precious minutes. Outside the windows, London was waking up to another day, unaware that within the walls of Clarence House, a mistake was about to unfold that would change everything. The royal household continued its careful choreography of duty and protocol, but Camilla could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders like never before. As Charles finally reached for the pills, time seemed to slow down. Every detail became crystal clear, the morning light catching the edges of the medication, the concerned voices of the security team, the watchful presence of Sergeant Matthews, and her own heart beating faster with each passing second. Something was about to go very wrong, and she was powerless to stop it. Charles swallowed the medication without hesitation, trusting completely in Camilla's careful attention to his health needs. She watched him drink the water, still feeling that nagging sense of unease but unable to pinpoint exactly what was wrong. The security briefing continued around them, creating a backdrop of urgent voices and rustling papers that somehow made the moment feel even more surreal. Within minutes, she noticed Charles beginning to look pale. At first, she attributed it to the stress of the morning's schedule changes and the intense security discussions. But as she watched more closely, she saw beads of perspiration forming on his forehead despite the cool morning air. His breathing seemed slightly labored, and he kept pressing his hand to his chest in a gesture that made her stomach drop. "Charles, are you feeling all right?" she asked quietly, trying not to alarm the security team who were still deep in their preparations. He looked at her with confusion in his eyes, as if he was having trouble focusing on her words. The color was draining from his face at an alarming rate, and she could see his hands beginning to tremble slightly. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She rushed to the medication organizer, her fingers fumbling as she checked the compartments. Her worst fears were confirmed when she saw the evening pills missing from tonight's section. In her morning rush and distraction, she had given him his nighttime medication instead of his morning doses. The evening pills included a strong sedative and a blood pressure medication that could be dangerous when taken at the wrong time. Panic flooded through her as she understood the gravity of what had happened. The nighttime medication was specifically designed to be taken before sleep, when his body could safely process the stronger dosages. Taking it in the morning, especially before a day of stress and activity, could cause his blood pressure to drop dangerously low or create other serious complications. Charles was now swaying slightly in his chair, his eyelids looking heavy. The security officers were so focused on their briefing materials that they hadn't yet noticed their monarch's deteriorating condition. Camilla knew she had to act quickly, but she also knew that revealing her mistake could create a security nightmare and potentially embarrass the royal family. Sergeant Matthews, however, had been watching the scene unfold with the trained eye of someone accustomed to noticing the smallest details. She saw him step forward slightly, his posture shifting from relaxed attention to alert concern. His years of experience had taught him to read situations quickly, and something in the dynamic between the king and queen had caught his attention. "Your Majesty," Matthews said carefully, addressing Charles with the respectful tone he always used, "perhaps you should postpone this morning's departure by a few minutes. You look as though you might benefit from a brief rest." Charles tried to wave off the concern, but his gesture was weak and uncoordinated. "I'm fine," he mumbled, but his words were slightly slurred, confirming Camilla's worst fears about the medication mix-up. She could see him fighting to stay alert, his royal training making him try to push through whatever was happening to his body. The lead security officer finally looked up from his papers and immediately noticed something was wrong. Years of protecting the royal family had made him acutely aware of any changes in their normal behavior or appearance. He quickly moved to Charles's side, his professional demeanor shifting into high alert mode. "Sir, I think we should call the medical team," he said firmly, reaching for his radio. But Camilla quickly stepped forward, her mind racing as she tried to figure out how to handle the situation without revealing her terrible mistake. She couldn't bear the thought of Charles suffering because of her error, but she also feared the consequences of admitting what had happened. Charles attempted to stand but immediately sat back down as dizziness overwhelmed him. His breathing was becoming more shallow, and Camilla could see that his condition was worsening rapidly. The medication interaction was progressing faster than she had anticipated, and she realized that trying to hide her mistake could put his life in serious danger. Sergeant Matthews moved closer, his experienced eyes taking in every detail of the scene. She could tell that he was putting together the pieces of what had happened, his gaze moving from the medication tray to Charles's symptoms to her obvious distress. His expression remained professional, but she sensed that he understood more than he was letting on. The morning that had started with such routine normalcy was rapidly becoming a medical emergency. The foreign dignitaries were waiting, the security arrangements were in place, and the royal schedule was set in motion. But none of that mattered now as Charles struggled to maintain consciousness while his wife faced the terrifying reality of what her mistake might cost them both. Time was running out, and Camilla knew she had to make a choice between protecting herself and protecting the man she loved. The weight of the crown had never felt heavier than it did in that moment, as she watched Charles fight against the effects of medication that was never meant to be taken at this time of day. The security officer's radio crackled to life, but before he could make the call for medical assistance, Camilla found her voice. "Wait," she said, her words coming out in a rush. "I need to tell you something important. I made a mistake with his medication this morning." The admission felt like a physical weight lifting from her chest. Even as she dreaded the consequences, Charles looked at her through increasingly heavy eyelids, confusion clouding his features. He tried to speak, but the words came out garbled and unclear. The sedative effects were becoming more pronounced, and she could see him fighting to stay conscious. His royal training had taught him to maintain composure in any situation, but his body was betraying him despite his determination. The lead security officer immediately shifted into crisis mode, speaking rapidly into his radio to summon the royal medical team. His voice was calm and professional, but Camilla could hear the underlying urgency as he described Charles's symptoms to the emergency responders. Within seconds, the quiet morning routine had transformed into a carefully orchestrated emergency response. Sergeant Matthews stepped closer to Camilla, his voice low and reassuring. "Your Majesty, what exactly did you give him?" His question was direct but not accusatory, focused entirely on gathering the information needed to help Charles. She appreciated his professional approach, even as shame burned through her at having to admit her carelessness. "His evening medication," she whispered, pointing to the empty compartment in the pill organizer, the blood pressure medication and the sedative. "I was distracted by the schedule changes and I wasn't thinking clearly." Each word felt like a confession of failure, but she knew that honesty was the only way to help Charles now. Matthews nodded grimly, his understanding of the situation immediately clear. He had been briefed on Charles's medical protocols as part of his security training, and he knew exactly what those evening medications could do when taken at the wrong time. The combination could cause dangerously low blood pressure, respiratory depression, or worse. Charles slumped further in his chair, his breathing becoming more labored. Camilla rushed to his side, taking his hand and finding it cold and clammy. His pulse was weak and irregular, confirming her worst fears about the medication interaction. She had never felt so helpless or so responsible for someone else's suffering. The royal medical team burst through the door within minutes, their emergency equipment already in hand. Dr. Harrison, Charles's personal physician, took one look at the situation and immediately began assessing vital signs while firing questions at Camilla about timing and dosages. His calm professionalism was reassuring, but she could see the concern in his eyes as he worked. "How long ago did he take the medication?" Dr. Harrison asked while checking Charles's blood pressure. The reading was dangerously low, exactly what Camilla had feared. She watched the medical team work with practiced efficiency, setting up monitoring equipment and preparing treatments to counteract the effects of the wrong medication. The security team had cleared the room of all non-essential personnel, but Sergeant Matthews remained at his post by the door. Camilla noticed how he seemed to be cataloging every detail of what was happening, his professional training making him a silent witness to the unfolding crisis. She wondered what he was thinking about her mistake and whether he would report everything he had seen. Dr. Harrison administered medication to help raise Charles's blood pressure and counteract the sedative effects. "We need to get him to the hospital," he announced after checking the latest readings. "His condition is stabilizing, but he needs monitoring and possibly additional treatments that we can't provide here." The thought of Charles being hospitalized because of her mistake made Camilla feel physically sick. She imagined the media attention, the questions about what had happened, and the potential impact on public confidence in the royal family. But more than any of that, she feared for Charles's life and health. Charles stirred slightly as the medical team prepared to transport him, his eyes finding hers with an expression that broke her heart. Even in his weakened state, she could see that he was trying to reassure her, his natural instinct to protect and comfort others overriding his own distress. It made her mistake feel even more unbearable. The ambulance arrived discreetly at a side entrance, its presence carefully shielded from any potential media attention. The Royal Protection Team had quickly implemented protocols to maintain privacy and security during the medical emergency. Everything was being handled with the utmost discretion, but Camilla knew that secrets this significant rarely stayed hidden for long. As the medical team prepared to move Charles to the stretcher, he managed to squeeze her hand weakly. "Not your fault," he whispered, though they both knew it absolutely was. His attempt to absolve her only made her feel worse about the chain of events she had set in motion with her moment of distraction. Sergeant Matthews approached her as the medical team worked. "Your Majesty, I'll be accompanying His Majesty to the hospital," he said quietly. "The protection detail needs to be maintained, and someone should be there who knows exactly what happened here." His words were professional, but she sensed layers of meaning beneath them that she couldn't quite decipher. The journey to the hospital felt endless, even though they traveled with emergency lights and sirens clearing the way through London traffic. Camilla sat beside Charles in the ambulance, watching the medical monitors that tracked his vital signs. Each beep and flash of the machines reminded her of how close she had come to causing irreparable harm to the man she loved. Dr. Harrison worked steadily during the transport, adjusting medications and monitoring Charles's response to treatment. His blood pressure was slowly improving, but he remained heavily sedated and his breathing was still concerning. The doctor's calm demeanor helped keep Camilla from completely falling apart, though guilt continued to eat away at her with each passing minute. Sergeant Matthews sat quietly near the ambulance doors, speaking occasionally into his radio to coordinate with the hospital security team. Camilla noticed how he seemed to be managing multiple layers of the crisis simultaneously, ensuring Charles's medical care, maintaining security protocols, and somehow also providing her with silent moral support through his steady presence. When they arrived at the private wing of the hospital, a full medical team was waiting. Charles was quickly transferred to a specially prepared room where royal patients could receive treatment while maintaining their privacy and security. The efficiency of the response impressed Camilla, but it also reminded her of how serious the situation had become. Dr. Thompson, the hospital's chief physician, took over Charles's care while Dr. Harrison briefed him on everything that had happened. Camilla found herself answering detailed questions about the medication mix-up, each query forcing her to relive her moment of carelessness. The medical team needed precise information to ensure they were treating the interaction correctly. Charles was connected to multiple monitoring devices, and the steady rhythm of the machines provided some comfort as his vital signs continued to improve. The medical team worked efficiently around him, adjusting treatments and monitoring his response. Slowly, his color began to return to normal, and his breathing became less labored. "The medication is working," Dr. Thompson announced after reviewing the latest test results. "His blood pressure is stabilizing, and the sedative effects are beginning to wear off. He's going to be fine, but we'll need to monitor him for several more hours to ensure there are no complications." Relief flooded through Camilla so powerfully that she had to sit down. The weight of potential tragedy that had been pressing on her chest all morning finally began to lift. Charles was going to be okay. Her mistake hadn't cost him his life, though it had certainly put him in serious danger. Sergeant Matthews approached her as the medical team continued their work. "Your Majesty, I need to ask you something," he said quietly, guiding her to a corner of the room where they could speak privately. His expression was serious but not unkind, and she braced herself for whatever question was coming. "Why didn't you tell anyone immediately when you realized what had happened?" he asked. "Those first few minutes when you knew but didn't say anything could have been crucial. What made you hesitate?" His question was direct but not accusatory, as if he genuinely wanted to understand her thought process. Camilla considered her answer carefully. "I was terrified," she admitted. "Not just about Charles getting hurt, but about admitting that I had made such a careless mistake. I thought maybe it wouldn't be serious, that he would be fine and no one would need to know. I was selfish and stupid, and I nearly made everything worse." Matthews nodded thoughtfully. "Your Majesty, I've been in protection services for 15 years and I've seen many different kinds of crises. The people who handle them best are usually the ones who put the person they're protecting above everything else, including their own reputation or comfort. You did the right thing when you told us what happened." His words were surprisingly comforting, though Camilla still felt the full weight of her responsibility for the morning's events. She looked at Charles lying in the hospital bed, still pale but clearly breathing more easily, and felt a mixture of relief and continued guilt. The immediate crisis was passing, but she knew the consequences of her mistake were far from over. Dr. Harrison approached with an update on Charles's condition.
He's responding well to treatment, he reported.
The medication interaction caused a significant drop in blood pressure and respiratory depression, but we caught it in time. He should be able to return home this evening, though he'll need to rest for the next few days. The foreign dignitaries had been quietly informed that the king was dealing with a minor health issue, and the meetings would be rescheduled. The royal communications team had managed to keep the hospital visit completely private, with no media attention or public awareness of what had happened. The crisis was being contained, but Camilla knew that didn't diminish the seriousness of what could have occurred. As Charles began to show signs of waking up, his eyes found hers with a mixture of love and concern. Even after everything that had happened, his first thought seemed to be about her well-being rather than his own. It made her both grateful for his love and even more ashamed of her mistake. Sergeant Matthews remained at his post, ever watchful and professional. But Camilla noticed something in his demeanor that suggested this incident had affected him more than he was letting on. She wondered what he was thinking about everything he had witnessed, and whether he truly understood how close they had all come to a much more serious tragedy. As Charles gradually regained full consciousness, the relief in the hospital room was palpable. His first words were characteristically concerned about others rather than himself. "Did we miss the meeting with the ambassadors?" he asked weakly, trying to sit up despite the medical equipment still monitoring his vital signs. Dr. Thompson gently pressed him back against the pillows. "Your Majesty, the meetings have been rescheduled. Your only concern right now should be resting and allowing your body to fully recover from this morning's incident." The doctor's tone was firm but respectful, making it clear that medical orders took precedence over royal duties. Camilla moved closer to Charles's bedside, taking his hand in hers. She could see the questions in his eyes as he tried to piece together what had happened. The medication mix-up had left him with gaps in his memory, and she knew she would have to explain everything to him. The thought of confessing her mistake directly to him made her stomach tighten with anxiety. "Charles," she began softly, "I need to tell you what happened this morning. I made a terrible mistake with your medication." She watched his face as understanding dawned, seeing the concern that immediately appeared in his eyes. But instead of anger or disappointment, she saw only love and worry for her obvious distress. Sergeant Matthews had been quietly observing the conversation from his position near the door. His trained eyes missed nothing, and Camilla noticed how he seemed to be mentally cataloging every detail of Charles's recovery and their interaction. She wondered what his official report would say about the morning's events and whether her mistake would become part of the permanent record. Charles squeezed her hand reassuringly. "These things happen," he said gently. "The important thing is that you recognized the problem and got help quickly. That's what matters now." His immediate forgiveness only made her feel worse about the potential consequences of her carelessness. Dr. Harrison approached with the latest test results. "Your blood work shows that the medication levels are returning to normal," he reported. "The effects should be completely gone within a few hours. However, I want to stress how important it is to have proper protocols in place to prevent this kind of mix-up from happening again." The gentle reprimand struck home, and Camilla felt the full weight of how her moment of distraction could have had catastrophic consequences. She thought about all the responsibilities that came with caring for someone in Charles's position, and how many people depended on his health and well-being. Her mistake hadn't just endangered her husband. It had potentially threatened the stability of the monarchy itself. Matthews stepped forward as the medical team finished their latest round of checks. "Your Majesty," he addressed Charles, "I'd like to discuss some additional security protocols that might help prevent similar incidents in the future. Sometimes a fresh perspective on daily routines can identify potential vulnerabilities." Charles nodded thoughtfully. "That's a good idea, Sergeant. I think we could all benefit from reviewing our procedures." He looked at Camilla with understanding in his eyes. "Sometimes even the most careful people can be overwhelmed by circumstances. The key is learning from what happened and making improvements." The afternoon wore on as Charles continued to recover, and the medical team prepared for his discharge. Camilla remained by his side, grateful for his forgiveness but still struggling with guilt over her mistake. She kept thinking about what could have happened if Sergeant Matthews hadn't been so observant, or if they had waited longer to seek medical help. Dr. Thompson pulled her aside as the discharge preparations began. Your Majesty, I want you to know that medication errors happen more often than people realize, even in the best of circumstances. The important thing is that you recognized the problem quickly and sought help immediately. That probably saved His Majesty from much more serious complications. His words were meant to be comforting, but Camilla couldn't shake the feeling that she had failed in one of her most important responsibilities. The trust that Charles placed in her care was sacred, and she had violated that trust through her own carelessness. The fact that everything had turned out well didn't erase the potential for tragedy that her mistake had created. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Sergeant Matthews approached them both. Your Majesties, I wanted you to know that this incident will be documented in my report, but only as a medical emergency that was handled appropriately by all involved. The specific details will remain confidential within the protection team. Camilla felt a surge of gratitude toward the guard who had been such a steady presence throughout the crisis. His discretion and professionalism had helped contain what could have become a much larger scandal. But she also sensed that his report would include recommendations for changes that would prevent similar incidents in the future. The ride home was quiet, with both Charles and Camilla lost in their own thoughts about the morning's events. The familiar streets of London passed by outside their windows, normal life continuing while they processed how close they had come to a very different outcome. The weight of responsibility that came with their positions had never felt heavier than it did during that silent journey back to Clarence House. The return to Clarence House felt surreal after the intensity of the morning's crisis. The familiar surroundings that had seemed so routine just hours earlier now carried the weight of what had almost happened within these walls. Staff members moved quietly through the corridors, their usual efficiency tinged with the subdued atmosphere that follows a near disaster. Charles insisted on reviewing some papers in his study, despite Dr. Harrison's orders to rest. Camilla watched him carefully, still alert for any signs that the medication effects hadn't completely worn off. Every slight pause in his movements or moment of hesitation made her heart rate spike with worry that something was still wrong. Sergeant Matthews had returned to his regular duties, but Camilla noticed how his attention seemed even more focused than usual. He positioned himself where he could observe both Charles and the medication area, clearly implementing his own informal safeguards while they developed more official protocols. His vigilance was both reassuring and a constant reminder of her mistake. Later that afternoon, Dr. Harrison arrived for a follow-up examination. He spent considerable time checking Charles's vital signs and cognitive function, ensuring that all effects of the medication mix-up had completely resolved. His thoroughness was professional and necessary, but each test reminded Camilla of how serious the situation had been. Everything looks normal, Dr. Harrison announced after completing his examination. However, I think we need to implement some additional safeguards around medication management. This kind of incident, while not uncommon, shouldn't happen again, especially given His Majesty's particular health needs. The doctor's recommendations included a double-check system where two people would verify medications before they were administered, clearly labeled containers for different times of day, and a detailed log of all medications given. Camilla listened to each suggestion with growing embarrassment, realizing how basic these precautions were and how she should have thought of them herself. Charles nodded approvingly at each recommendation. These sound like excellent ideas, Doctor. I think we should implement them immediately. He looked at Camilla with gentle understanding. Sometimes it takes an incident like this to recognize that our procedures need updating. It's not about blame, it's about improvement. As evening approached, Camilla found herself alone with Sergeant Matthews in the corridor outside Charles's study. He had been conducting his security rounds, but she sensed he had been waiting for an opportunity to speak with her privately. His expression was thoughtful and serious, as if he had been considering his words carefully. Your Majesty, he began quietly, I wanted you to know that I've seen many different kinds of emergencies in my years of service. What impressed me most about today was how quickly you were willing to put His Majesty's safety above your own concerns once you realized what had happened. Camilla felt tears threatening at his unexpected kindness. But I should never have made the mistake in the first place, she replied. I was careless and distracted, and I could have killed him. How do I live with that knowledge? Matthews considered her question carefully. Your Majesty, in my experience, the people who worry most about making mistakes are usually the ones least likely to repeat them. What happened today will make you more careful and more aware, which actually makes His Majesty safer in the long run. His perspective was surprisingly comforting, though Camilla still struggled with the guilt of what had occurred. She appreciated his professional assessment, but she couldn't shake the image of Charles's pale face and labored breathing, knowing that she had caused his suffering through her own carelessness. That evening, as they prepared for bed, Charles and Camilla talked quietly about the day's events. The new medication protocols were already in place, with clearly labeled containers and a checklist that would be verified by both of them before any medication was administered. The changes felt both necessary and like a constant reminder of her mistake. "I keep thinking about what could have happened," Camilla confessed as they sat together in their private sitting room. "If Sergeant Matthews hadn't been so observant, if the medical team hadn't responded so quickly, if any number of things had gone differently." Charles took her hand gently. "But they didn't go differently," he said firmly. "The people around us did their jobs well, including you when it mattered most. We learned something important today about the need for better systems, and now we're safer because of it." The following morning brought a return to more normal routines, though everything felt different under the shadow of the previous day's events. The new medication protocols worked smoothly, with both Charles and Camilla checking and double-checking before anything was administered. The extra steps felt cumbersome at first, but they provided peace of mind that was worth the inconvenience. Sergeant Matthews maintained his usual professional demeanor, but Camilla noticed subtle changes in his attention patterns. He seemed to position himself where he could observe the medication routine, and she caught him making notes in a small notebook during his rounds. His enhanced vigilance was reassuring, though it served as a constant reminder of how close they had come to tragedy. The official report of the incident was filed quietly within the Royal Protection Services, with recommendations for enhanced medical protocols that would be implemented throughout all royal residences. What had started as a personal mistake had become a catalyst for improved safety measures that would protect the entire royal family. As the day progressed and normal routines resumed, Camilla began to understand that while her mistake had been serious and potentially dangerous, the way it was handled had actually strengthened the protective systems around Charles. The incident had revealed vulnerabilities that could now be addressed, making future mistakes less likely and less dangerous. 3 weeks after the incident, the new medication protocols had become second nature throughout the royal household. The double-check system was working flawlessly, and Charles's health remained stable and strong. What had begun as a terrifying mistake had evolved into a comprehensive safety improvement that protected not just Charles, but established better practices for the entire royal medical program. Camilla found herself more confident in her caregiving role, not despite her mistake, but because of how she had learned from it. The new systems removed the pressure of trying to manage complex medication schedules alone, while still allowing her to maintain her caring involvement in Charles's health. The guilt that had consumed her, immediately after the incident, had transformed into a heightened awareness that actually made her more effective. Sergeant Matthews had been quietly promoted within the Royal Protection Services, his handling of the crisis and subsequent protocol recommendations earning recognition from his superiors. Camilla learned about his advancement through Charles, who made sure to personally thank Matthews for his professionalism and discretion during what could have been a much more serious situation. During a private moment, Matthews approached Camilla with something he had been considering since the incident. "Your Majesty," he said respectfully, "I wanted you to know that what happened that morning has been used as a training scenario for other protection officers. Your willingness to prioritize His Majesty's safety over personal embarrassment is being held up as an example of how crises should be handled." The idea that her mistake had become a teaching tool was both humbling and oddly comforting. Camilla realized that by facing the consequences of her error honestly and immediately, she had actually contributed to better safety protocols that would benefit others in similar situations. Her moment of weakness had ultimately strengthened the entire system. Charles's foreign diplomatic meetings had been successfully rescheduled, and he had returned to his full schedule of royal duties without any lasting effects from the medication incident. The visiting dignitaries never learned about the medical emergency that had delayed their original meeting, and the press remained completely unaware that anything unusual had occurred. Dr. Harrison continued his regular checkups with Charles, monitoring not just his ongoing health needs but also ensuring that the new medication protocols were working effectively. He often commented on how much more systematic and safe the current approach was compared to their previous informal methods. What had seemed like a catastrophic failure had actually revealed the need for improvements that benefited everyone. The private hospital where Charles had been treated had also implemented some of the protocols developed in response to the incident. Dr. Thompson reached out to thank them for their cooperation in developing better emergency response procedures for medication interactions. Their personal crisis had contributed to improved medical practices that would help other patients in similar situations. On the anniversary of the incident, Charles and Camilla had a quiet conversation about how much had changed since that frightening morning. The terror and guilt that had consumed those first hours had given way to a deeper understanding of their responsibilities and better systems to fulfill them. Their relationship had actually grown stronger through facing the crisis together. "I've been thinking about Sergeant Matthews and how he handled everything," Charles said during their reflection. "His ability to see what was happening and respond appropriately probably saved my life. But what impressed me most was how he supported you through the aftermath without ever making you feel judged or blamed." Camilla nodded, remembering the guard's steady presence throughout the crisis. "He saw everything that happened, but he focused on solutions rather than fault. That made it possible for me to be honest about what I had done, which was essential for getting you the right medical care quickly." The new morning routine now included not just the medication checks, but also a brief moment where Charles and Camilla connected before the day's responsibilities took over. This simple addition to their schedule created a buffer against the kind of rushed distraction that had led to the original mistake. They had learned to protect their careful attention to health matters from the pressure of external demands. Looking back, Camilla understood that the incident had taught her something crucial about handling responsibility and mistakes. The natural instinct to hide errors and hope they would resolve themselves was dangerous, especially when other people's well-being was at stake. The courage to admit mistakes immediately, despite personal embarrassment, was actually a form of strength that protected the people she loved. Sergeant Matthews remained with their security detail, his enhanced attention to medical protocols now a permanent part of his duties. He had become not just a protector of their physical safety, but a guardian of the systems that kept them healthy and safe. His role had evolved beyond traditional security into a more comprehensive form of care and protection. The medication that had caused the crisis was still part of Charles's treatment regimen, but now it was managed with multiple safeguards that made errors virtually impossible. The evening pills were stored in a completely different location, administered by a different person, and documented in a way that created clear accountability. What had once been a source of danger was now managed with complete confidence. The terrifying morning, that had begun with such promise and nearly ended in tragedy, had ultimately strengthened every aspect of their health and safety protocols. Camilla's mistake had cost them hours of fear and worry, but it had purchased years of improved safety and peace of mind. Sometimes, she reflected, the most frightening experiences become the most valuable teachers, transforming weakness into wisdom and fear into vigilance.